New York City's cold winter air cut through the streets like a sharp blade. Cars honked, people rushed, and the city never slept. In the middle of all this chaos, Emily Carter, a 23-year-old intern at one of the biggest corporate firms, Hamilton Enterprises, hurried toward the subway station. Her internship was unpaid, and with student loans piling up, she barely made ends meet. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself, her fingers numb from the cold. The station was crowded, people pushing past each other, lost in their own worlds. She stepped onto the platform, her thoughts filled with the endless struggles of finding a stable job after graduation. Just then, she noticed an old man sitting near the edge of the platform, his clothes torn and his hands trembling. A small cardboard sign lay in front of him. Hungry. Cold. Please help. People walked past him as if he was invisible. Some even sneered, avoiding eye contact. Emily felt a pang of guilt. She had very little money herself, but something about this man tugged at her heart. She crouched down, her voice gentle. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked up, his deep brown eyes filled with sorrow. I just need some food," he whispered. Without hesitation, Emily reached into her bag, pulling out a sandwich she had packed for lunch. "Here, it is not much, but it should help." The old man hesitated before taking it. "Thank you, child. You have a kind heart." Emily smiled. "Do you have anywhere to go?" He shook his head. "No family. No home." Emily sighed, glancing at her watch. She was already late for work, but something inside her would not let her leave him like this. "Wait here," she said, rushing into a nearby coffee shop. She used the last of her money to buy him a hot cup of coffee and a muffin. When she returned, he looked at her with eyes full of gratitude. "You did not have to do this," he said, his voice shaking. "Everyone deserves kindness," she replied. Just then the subway arrived, and Emily stood up. "I have to go now, but take care, okay?" The man nodded, watching as she disappeared into the crowd. The next morning at Hamilton Enterprises, Emily walked into the office, hoping her supervisor would not scold her for being late. As she stepped inside the massive glass building, the receptionist gave her a strange look. "You are wanted in the conference room, right now." Emily's heart pounded. Had she done something wrong? She rushed to the conference room, only to find the CEO, Mr. Jonathan Hamilton, sitting at the head of the table. He was a powerful man, known for his ruthless business tactics. Next to him sat a familiar figure, the old man she had helped at the subway station. But something was different. He was no longer in tattered clothes. Instead, he wore an elegant designer suit, his hair neatly combed, and his entire presence radiated authority. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Who was he? The man smiled at her. "Please, have a seat, Ms. Carter." She hesitated before sitting down, her mind racing with questions. Then, Mr. Hamilton leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Do you know who this man is?" Emily swallowed hard. I do not. I only know that he needed help." The old man chuckled, his eyes twinkling. "And yet, you helped me, even when you had nothing to give." Mr. Hamilton smiled for the first time. "Emily, meet Mr. William Anderson. He is not just any stranger. He is the chairman of this company. My father." Emily's eyes widened in shock. What?" Mr. Anderson nodded. "I was testing something. And you, young lady, have just changed your life forever." Emily sat frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. Mr. William Anderson, the beggar she had helped, was actually the chairman of Hamilton Enterprises. She looked at him again, expecting some kind of mistake, but the warm smile on his face told her otherwise. You are the chairman?" she finally managed to say. Mr. Anderson chuckled. "Surprised?" Emily nodded rapidly, her heart pounding. This was unreal. Just yesterday, she had been sitting on the subway floor, giving him her lunch, and now he was sitting in front of her, wearing an expensive suit. "I do not understand," she admitted. Why were you pretending to be homeless?" Mr. Jonathan Hamilton, the CEO, leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on her. "My father has a habit of testing people," he explained. "He believes that true character is revealed when no one is watching." Mr. Anderson smiled. "For years, I have watched people walk past the homeless as if they do not exist. Most ignore them. Some insult them. But very few stop to help. You, Emily, were one of those few." Emily swallowed, still unsure of what to say. Was she in trouble for being late yesterday? Was this some kind of elaborate joke? "I just did what anyone should do," she said carefully. Mr. Anderson shook his head. "No, child. You did what most people refuse to do." Silence filled the room for a moment before Mr. Hamilton spoke again. "Tell me, Emily, why did you help him? You are an unpaid intern. You are struggling yourself. Why give your last meal to a stranger?" Emily hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because I know what it feels like to struggle. I know what it feels like to be invisible." Mr. Anderson's eyes softened. "Go on." She bit her lip. "I lost my parents when I was 16. I grew up in the foster system. I worked hard to get into college, but I have always had to fight for everything. I know how cruel the world can be. So when I see someone else struggling, I cannot just walk away. I do not want anyone to feel as alone as I once did." The room fell silent again. Even Mr. Hamilton, who always seemed cold and distant, looked slightly affected. Mr. Anderson let out a deep breath. "That is exactly the kind of person we need in this company." Emily blinked. "What?" Mr. Hamilton smiled slightly. "We are offering you a full-time job, Emily, effective immediately." Emily's breath hitched. A full-time job?" Mr. Anderson nodded. "Not as an intern, a permanent position. With a salary, her heart nearly stopped. She had been struggling for months, working endless hours, hoping that one day someone would notice her efforts. And now, just like that, they were offering her a real job. This had to be a dream. I do not know what to say," she whispered. Mr. Anderson smiled. "Say yes." Tears burned in Emily's eyes. She had spent so long fighting for a chance like this, and all of it had happened because she stopped for a beggar on the street. She nodded rapidly. "Yes, yes, of course." Mr. Hamilton stood up. "Welcome to Hamilton Enterprises." Ms. Carter. Emily shook his hand, still feeling as if she was in a daze. This morning she had woken up worried about how she would afford rent. Now, she had a full-time job at one of the biggest corporations in the city. And it all happened because she had chosen kindness. But what Emily did not know was that this was only the beginning. Her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. Emily could barely believe what had just happened. A full-time job, a real salary. It felt like a dream. She left the conference room in a daze, her heart pounding with excitement and disbelief. Just yesterday, she was struggling to afford lunch, and now she was an official employee at Hamilton Enterprises. As she reached her small desk, her phone vibrated. It was a message from her best friend, Mia. "Mia, hey, how's your day going?" "Emily, you will not believe what just happened." "Mia, tell me." Emily paused for a moment. How could she even put this into words? "Emily, I got a full-time job. Because I gave a beggar my sandwich yesterday." The typing bubbles appeared immediately. "Mia, wait. What?" "Emily, long story. I will explain later." She put her phone down, still trying to absorb everything. Just then, her new manager, Mr. Reynolds, walked up to her desk. He was in his mid-40s, a man with sharp features and an even sharper tone. "Ms. Carter, congratulations on your new position," he said, though his voice lacked warmth. Emily smiled. "Thank you, sir. I'm really excited to start." He nodded, but his eyes remained cold. "Do not get too comfortable. Just because you impress the chairman does not mean you will get special treatment. You have to prove you belong here." Emily straightened. "I understand." "Good. Your first task is to assist on the upcoming investor presentation. You will be working directly with Mr. Hamilton." Her stomach flipped. "The CEO?" Yes, and he does not tolerate mistakes. Do not disappoint him. Emily nodded quickly. I will do my best. Mr. Reynolds gave her one last look before walking away. She exhaled slowly. So this was not going to be easy. That evening, Emily stayed late at the office, going through files and spreadsheets. She wanted to be fully prepared before her first meeting with Mr. Hamilton. The entire building was nearly empty, the once busy office now eerily quiet. As she flipped through documents, she heard footsteps. Looking up, she saw Mr. William Anderson, the chairman, standing near her desk. Still here? He asked with a smile. Emily stood up quickly. Yes, sir. I wanted to make sure I was prepared for tomorrow. He chuckled. That is the kind of dedication I like to see. He glanced at the papers on her desk. How are you feeling about everything? She hesitated before answering. Honestly, a little overwhelmed. I never expected any of this. Mr. Anderson nodded. I understand, but let me tell you something, Emily. Hard work opens doors, but kindness? Kindness changes lives. The world needs more people like you. Her chest tightened at his words. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. He smiled. Call me William, and if you ever need anything, my door is always open. Emily watched as he walked away, feeling a new sense of determination. She was not going to waste this opportunity. The next morning, Emily stepped into the massive conference room, clutching her notes tightly. This was it. Her first real challenge. Mr. Hamilton sat at the head of the long table, flipping through a file. He barely looked up as she entered. Sit. She quickly took a seat. We have a meeting with the investors in 3 days, he said. I need you to analyze last quarter's financials and identify potential weak points. Can you do that? Emily nodded. Yes, sir. I will have a report ready by tomorrow morning. He finally looked up, his gaze piercing. I do not give second chances, Ms. Carter. Make sure it is perfect. Her palms felt sweaty, but she kept her voice steady. Understood. Mr. Hamilton studied her for a moment before giving a small nod. Good. You are dismissed. As Emily walked out of the room, she knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of the biggest challenge of her life, and she was ready. Emily worked through the night, her eyes scanning the financial reports with laser focus. She knew she had only one chance to prove herself, and failure was not an option. As the sun peeked through the office windows, Emily finally put the finishing touches on her report. She double-checked every number, ensuring there was no room for error. This was her first major task, and she was determined to impress Mr. Hamilton. With a deep breath, she gathered her documents and made her way to the CEO's office. The hallways were already bustling with employees, their conversations blending into a sea of background noise. She knocked on the door. Enter. Mr. Jonathan Hamilton sat behind his massive desk, skimming through emails on his laptop. He barely looked up as she stepped inside. The report? He asked. Emily placed the neatly printed document in front of him. Everything you requested, sir. I have highlighted the weak points and also suggested strategies to improve our financial standing in the next quarter. Mr. Hamilton finally looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. Suggested strategies. Emily swallowed. Yes, sir. I took the liberty of including a few potential solutions that could maximize our revenue streams while cutting unnecessary costs. He raised an eyebrow. You were only asked to identify the weak points. Emily straightened her shoulders. I know, sir, but I wanted to go the extra mile. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Mr. Hamilton flipped through the report, his expression unreadable. Emily's heart pounded. Had she overstepped? Had she made a mistake? Finally, he set the document down and leaned back in his chair. Interesting. Emily blinked. Sir? Your analysis is solid. Your solutions are unexpected but effective. He closed the folder and looked at her. Not bad, Ms. Carter. Emily let out a breath she did not realize she was holding. Not bad. Coming from Jonathan Hamilton, that was practically a standing ovation. Thank you, sir. Mr. Hamilton glanced at his watch. There is an investors' meeting in 2 hours. Be there. I want you to present your findings. Emily's stomach dropped. Me? Present? Yes. That is a problem? She shook her head quickly. No, sir, not at all. Good. Do not embarrass me. Emily nodded and quickly exited the office. The moment she was out of sight, she pressed a hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heartbeat. She was going to present in front of the investors? This was way bigger than she had anticipated. If she did well, she could cement her place in the company. But if she failed, she did not even want to think about that. She took a deep breath. She had worked too hard to back down now. 2 hours later. Emily stood at the head of the massive conference table, a dozen high-profile investors watching her intently. At the far end sat Mr. Hamilton, and beside him, Mr. William Anderson, the chairman. She gripped the edges of the table, her palms slightly sweaty. But she pushed aside her nerves and focused. This was her moment. She took a deep breath and began. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emily Carter, and today I will be presenting a financial analysis for Hamilton Enterprises, along with key strategies for growth. She clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared on the massive screen. As she spoke, she could feel the room change. The investors, who initially seemed indifferent, were now fully engaged. Even Mr. Hamilton, who had looked disinterested at the start, was leaning forward slightly, listening closely. She pointed to the screen. By implementing these cost-cutting measures, we can increase our net profit margins by 15% in the next 2 quarters. Additionally, by expanding into digital markets, we estimate a 20% rise in revenue streams, particularly in younger demographics, she continued, her voice growing stronger with confidence. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then one of the lead investors, Mr. Carter Wells, slowly clapped. Impressive. Very impressive. Others nodded in agreement. One investor even turned to Mr. Hamilton. I like her. She is sharp. If this is the level of talent Hamilton Enterprises is hiring, I have no doubt the company is in good hands. Emily's heart soared. She did it. She really did it. She risked a glance at Mr. Anderson, who gave her a proud smile. Mr. Hamilton, however, simply nodded once. Well done, Miss Carter. You may leave. Emily collected her notes and walked out, keeping her expression composed. But the moment she was out of sight, a huge smile broke across her face. She had just won over the investors. She had proven herself, and she knew deep down this was just the beginning. But she had no idea. Her biggest test was yet to come. Emily stepped out of the conference room, her heart still pounding from the rush of her presentation. She could hardly believe what had just happened. She had walked into that room as an intern turned new employee, unsure of her place. But she had walked out with the respect of top investors and even a nod of approval from the ruthless Mr. Hamilton. As she walked back to her desk, her phone buzzed. Mia. How did it go? Emily. I nailed it. She barely had time to process her victory before a familiar voice called out to her. Ms. Carter, the chairman would like to see you in his office. Emily turned to see Mr. Reynolds, her manager, looking at her with his usual unreadable expression. She swallowed hard. Mr. Anderson wanted to see her? She quickly gathered her things and made her way to the top floor, the chairman's personal office. The office was massive, with a breathtaking view of the New York skyline. Mr. William Anderson stood near the window, staring outside as if deep in thought. When he turned, his eyes held a warmth that instantly put Emily at ease. You did well today, Emily. She exhaled. Thank you, sir. It means a lot coming from you. He gestured for her to sit, and she did. Do you know why I gave you this opportunity? He asked. Emily hesitated. Because I helped you that day? Mr. Anderson shook his head. That was only the beginning. You helped me, yes. But what truly impressed me was what you did after you were given a chance. You could have taken this job and coasted. Instead, you worked harder than anyone else. You took risks. You proved yourself. That is rare, Emily. She felt a lump form in her throat. All her life she had fought to be noticed, to prove her worth. And now someone truly saw her. I want to offer you something bigger. Emily's eyes widened. Bigger? Mr. Anderson smiled. A leadership training program. We select a few promising employees and groom them for executive roles. If you accept, you will be mentored directly by me. Emily froze. Was she hearing this right? A leadership program? Mentored by the chairman himself? Her entire life had been about survival. Paying bills, working 2 jobs, making ends meet. Now, she was being offered a future. A real future. She took a shaky breath. Yes, I would love that. Mr. Anderson's smile widened. Good choice. Just then, the door swung open. Mr. Hamilton stepped in, his sharp gaze locking onto Emily. You accepted? He asked, as if he already knew the answer. Emily nodded. Then I expect to see that same level of dedication in everything you do. She straightened. You will, sir. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, passed through his expression. Then welcome to the real game, Ms. Carter. 3 months later, Emily stood in front of a new intern, handing her a cup of coffee. You look like you need this, she said with a smile. The intern, nervous, overwhelmed, stared at her in shock. Wait, you are Emily Carter, the one who won over the investors? Emily chuckled. I guess my reputation precedes me. The intern took the coffee with shaky hands. Why are you helping me? Emily's smile softened. Because I know how it feels to be in your shoes. As the intern walked away, Emily glanced at the executive wing, where her office now was. She had gone from a struggling intern to an employee, from an employee to a future leader, and it had all started with one act of kindness. Moral of the story. Success is not just about talent. It is about character, hard work, and seizing opportunities when they come. One act of kindness can change your entire destiny.